When I introduce you guys, you can come up. All right. Welcome to our last industry session for the 15th annual Canada's Top 10 Film Festival. I hope you've had a chance to check out the Samsar gear outside in the Samsar VR Lounge, but if you haven't, it's open till 7 p.m., so you still have a chance. Our last session is meant to inspire and explore how virtual reality can be used to present one-of-a-kind experiences. Secret Location has been reinventing the way we interact with technology and raising the standards on what to expect. Leading this discussion with James Milward, President and Executive Producer of Secret Location, is Ken Price, VP Product Management and Development of their mobile division from Samsung Canada. Please welcome Ken and James.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I think that we're standing between you guys and drinks, is what I was told. So that's always the great slot in the day, right? So between me and and all of the fun. I was also having a debate with James. I don't know whether in this industry this is like early. So, usually if I'm speaking at an IT event or something like that, it's just going to be late in the day. But for you guys, I imagine you're just getting rolling. So, being in the industry that you're in. But anyway, so why is the Samsung dude here? So maybe I'll start with that, because Samsung obviously is an unconventional curator for a conversation around content, and yet really that's what have become. We present what you produce for us, and in fact, what's happened over time in the industry is that we've presented ever more interesting content. And we've tried to keep up and lead, in terms of bringing more interesting TV and 3D technology and smartphones now that are 4K capable, which has really, pushed the envelope. So we feel like we're very much invested in what you produce. And the next wave, I guess the one that you're interested in, I'm really interested in hearing from James, is around this world of 360 content and virtual reality and the ability to create stories and content that are truly immersive. And that's why I'm here, because that's what Samsung sees as part of the vision. We had a kind of a happy collaboration between really the dude from California, young kid from California starts Oculus. This is one of these stories, right, about a young entrepreneur that starts something up, and he's using our phone technology and then gets introduced to Samsung executives. And that's why there's a partnership really between Oculus and Samsung that has started, and why we have that affiliation. It's not the only thing going on in the industry, but really Oculus has, let's say, led the introduction into mass of this technology. And now we have products that really leverage our smartphone usage. So if you buy a high-end Samsung phone, it's not for everything, because you can appreciate that the technology needs to be at a certain place. You can basically snap that phone into goggles for $150 and immerse yourself in the worlds that James creates and others, and that really has become affordable. So we've now put thousands of these into the marketplace in Canada alone, against our, hundreds of thousands and millions of smartphones that are potential users of those. So we have a platform, and I think that's the first part of the discussion. But what I'm interested in, and so that's the Samsung story and the slight linear narrative around why we're interested in this. But this would go nowhere if we didn't get visionaries that wanted to create content. And so I'm interested first, James, in sort of your story. Like, you started as a digital agency, and here you are now, 2-time Emmy Award-winning and Cannes-recognized, content provider in this world. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So way back in the dark ages, I used to work in traditional film production, linear film production, mostly in commercial production. That's how I sort of began my career, and I started as a PA, and I was a coordinator and a PM and then a producer, and sort of saw that the evolution of interactivity and how interactivity merged with content, and at the time we called it rich media on the web, could evolve and create a new format for cinematic media. So that's kind of what I've been doing, and we've been doing since the very beginning of when we were able to actually deliver this on a new platform or an evolving platform at the time, the internet, the web. And I started Secret Location after a period at another agency. And I have two business partners, our creative director and our technical director, and I work as the executive producer, and we were always kind of like three legs of the stool At the end of the day, if we had to, cut everybody and pray for our lives, we could build, produce, and develop a website or an app if that's what we needed to do. And fortunately, we never got to that point, and we started getting more opportunities and growing the business. And we were working in both brand and entertainment as a service company. So we were working to build campaigns, marketing, and to a certain extent content when it came to the right times of projects. The way we always focused our vision or our goal was around a mentality. So it was a philosophy of emerging platforms and storytelling and figuring out how those things fit together. So we were never a platform-specific company. We were never the Facebook app guys or the mobile phone guys or, God forbid, the SMS guys or whatever has died on the vine. And it was because those things, platforms, technology, that transcends, that evolves, but a methodology is something that you can rely on and continue to evolve with. So for us, storytelling was that piece. It was a passion, and it was also an interest and an expertise, and we were able to add a lot of value when it came to the digital extensions and the digital pieces, and we started getting the opportunity to be a bit more upstream in the content. So especially in the entertainment space and in the advertising agency space, where they didn't necessarily have a lot of digital fluency, we would get asked to come earlier and earlier in the development of either a campaign or a brand or an entertainment property, and until we started being brought on the script stage or the early concept stage, or a director or a writer would ask us for our advice on how we could expand the story world. And then it started to become transmedia, which was just another buzzword, and viral videos and all that crap started, becoming buzzwords. And at the end of the day, it was still just delivering content. And so, to make a long story short, Secret Location is now 70 people. We're 65 here in Toronto, 5 in LA. But the reality of it is, the blend of our people is a combination of creative producers, writers, directors, developers, still web developers, app developers, iOS and Android, Unity, Unreal Engine. These are things that are creation mediums, not necessarily platform-specific mediums. And at the end of the day, we use that team to try and innovate whatever we're doing. So we still make websites. We still, do the Big Brother Canada website and live streaming and all that stuff. But we also have discovered that virtual reality and augmented reality and all these platforms are things we want to dip our toes in. So go back 18 months, nearly 2 years now, to really 3 years ago when the Kickstarter campaign came out from Palmer Luckey, who was the creator of the Oculus Rift. We were one of the first Kickstarter sort of participants. We got our Oculus Rift DK1 headset, and I think it was a doorstop in our office for the first 2 months because we couldn't figure out what to do with it. And then we started tinkering a little bit, and that's kind of always how it goes. You end up sort of prototyping, and we have a very iterative, agile process. So we're always trying to make small iterations of what we do and then see if it works and then build on that. So what ended up happening is we ended up in a collaboration with the Columbia School of Journalism and Vice to build a documentary in virtual reality. We were doing that on a subject matter that was in the Middle East, and then the war broke out in Israel and Palestine, and we put that on ice. It ended up getting transitioned to another news organization, but at the end of the day, we were in the weeds on that to the degree that we started developing. We, at the same time, were invited to go into Fox to talk about their show Sleepy Hollow, because we had a relationship with the producers of that show and the owners of the company, Alex Kurtzman and Bob Orsi, who are big screenwriters and directors, and they were interested in pushing the limits. And so we ended up going in, and Fox, actually, this is a story I can tell that has a happy ending, but we went in and we pitched I think 4 concepts, and they're like, yeah, they're all great, but why do you need to do them? And I was like, well, because we thought of the idea and we make things. And anyways, and they were like, yeah, but we'll just do that. So what else do you have? And I was sitting in an hour-long meeting, and they were like, no, but really, what else are you working on? And I started talking about the Vice documentary, and they're like, oh, that's great. Comic-Con's coming up. What could you do for virtual reality? And they were like, can you come back tomorrow morning and pitch? And so we came back tomorrow morning, pitched an idea that we'd worked up overnight, and sold it in the room. They handed us a check the following Monday, and we had 7 weeks to build the experience for Comic-Con with Sleepy Hollow. And it was interesting because it was very, very early on in virtual reality. So we still had, and we still do, but we were fortunate enough to get in pretty early with the Oculus team. And so we were able to start collaborating with really, really smart people like Eugene Chung and Joe Chen there, who were able to start sort of translating what was happening in the code base for the new developer kit, which was the DK2, and what we were working on, and we started evolving and basically created a story, a content story. We ended up we had to create our own stereoscopic camera, which we ended up calling Johnny 5 because it looked like the robot from Short Circuit. And we went to North Carolina, and we were able to get the lead actor on the show to shoot on green screen. We shot a stereoscopic scene with him that we then ended up building into a CG environment and telling a story where the Headless Horseman ends up cutting off your head at the end of it, which is a nice twist because you're in virtual reality. And we created a social token and a 40-foot barn at Comic-Con, and it was one of the sort of most trafficked exhibits. And then, and it was one of the pieces that Oculus had really liked the most. And from that point on, both people coming through Comic-Con and also seeing the huge media transaction that happened around that property, we ended up getting a bunch of other opportunities. And then it just kind of exploded for us. So everything else in that linear journey has been, working with movie studios. The piece that started out with Vice, we just launched with Frontline. We did a year-long project on the Ebola crisis, taking 360 3D cameras into Sierra Leone and West Africa and figuring that out. We did a sports project where we went and shot a basketball game from 12 different angles and pieced that together. We sort of started dipping our toes into different genres, just discovering what we could do.
Well, that's it's fantastic and phenomenal. And actually, what you've painted is really a picture of what is happening. There's so many ways in which this is coming to life. It's almost, the imagination of people. It's really what's going to drive the nature of content. We're already seeing that. So, for example, we're Curate at Samsung. As part of our Gear VR experience, we have a storefront, a way of getting content, and there are 500 titles on there. And those titles are pretty varied, in terms of either videos or pictures, or they immerse you in different ways to take advantage of this, or there are games, there's interactivity. So it seems like the content possibilities are very broad. You've already taken advantage of that. And I think I'm kind of interested in that as a storyteller about, you're probably used to telling a story a certain way, that suddenly, boom, you see this Oculus experience. And then I would say that even in the material, and we'll see a clip of that a little bit later, material you've done very different things. You jumped around a little bit even there, right? I did a movie, kind of a movie adaptation. I did a sports piece. I've done, Ebola virus, kind of frontline, very serious PBS material. So you can talk about that as as the media and what that means as you're producing a story.
So, I think traditional linear storytelling, whether it's literature or radio or film or TV, you get at this point we have a long runway. It's tradecraft, it's the ability to transact on what's worked before. It's 50, 60, thousands of years of storytelling, sitting around a fire, talking about how we murdered a woolly mammoth, that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, we still know that those are the kinds of stories and story structures that ultimately resonate with audiences. And I think it's important to just call out that any technology is just a tool. It's just as Steve Jobs said, computer's a bicycle for the mind. It unlocks and exercises things in our creativity that allows us to ultimately expand what's possible. And that's the same with virtual reality. It both takes advantage of the things we've learned in traditional storytelling and good characters, good worlds, the development of a structure that allows for the audience to give over to that story and allow that to wash over them and take control. But at the same time, there's affordances, there's opportunities because you have a 360-degree frameless environment. There's opportunities to do new things, and there's limitations from previous ways of creating. So in a framed experience, whether it's TV or film, you are able to editorialize content in a very specific way to create drama, to use and move the audience's attention, to enable perspective or the ability to understand a story from a certain construct. In a 360 3D environment, you can cut between scenes and transitions, but ultimately you don't end up having the same kind of editorial process because the 360 3D environment is naturally surrounding you at all given times. So
James, did you catch yourself doing this and then realize you didn't have to?
Sort of.
Is that sort of the way that worked?
That's very similar to the way it worked. And in fact, that went all the way back to, realizing that when you make a storyboard, you're talking about a very specific perspective. So we had to invent a new format of making 360 3D storyboards in order to
Right.
be able to plan our shoots and explain what we were doing to our clients and our partners and the crew. It really is about deconstructing what you've done and then reconstructing it with the experiences that you've had and adding on what you think is necessary.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting, as somebody who's consuming some of this content, it's also interesting that people will experience it in different ways, almost by definition. Right. Because what will happen is there's a perspective that the device itself will lend, and so as you're moving around, that's what you see. You know, obviously your field of vision is limited to the 180 degrees or whatever it is that you're seeing, and you know, so what I see in that moment might be different than somebody else enjoying the same content later, which I think makes it possible to enjoy it multiple ways and over and over again, because the way that you interact might be different each time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's both an opportunity, and it makes it fun to repeat experiences and look around multiple different times, multiple different ways. It also is a liability if you want somebody to look in a very specific direction as a storyteller, because they could miss that action. They could miss that crucial moment. So
Right.
we're constantly sort of trying to figure out where that right balance is to allow that free exploration where it's a value add, and where we need people to be directed and how we're going to direct them in order to make that value that we've done as storytellers and authors of content meaningful.
I see some people dropping in cues, like there's a serial on Milk VR where you are invited to look at a different perspective,
Right.
or kind of move and look, and then here's a clue, which actually brings you to something that's important in terms of understanding the story, which in this case is a mystery. Do you think that's an opportunity?
I mean, I think where we're at in the VR business right now, it's important to understand, like, with the exception of Samsung and with the exception of Google Cardboard, which really isn't a proprietary product, it's just a set of open source schematics, and anyone can cut a piece of cardboard and lenses and make that. There's really no consumer level virtual reality. We're at the very least 2 to 4 months out from the first real premium, beyond a mobile device consumer headset, whether that's Oculus or the Sony PlayStation or now the HTC Vive or a number of others. There are low-grade competitors in the vein of Google Cardboard, being that they've made Google Cardboard into plastic, or they've made certain things a little bit sweeter in terms of the lenses. You have the Mattel Viewmaster, for instance, which is basically just a red plastic Google Cardboard with better lenses that you stick your phone in the front of. But ultimately, VR isn't really a consumer market yet. So that's why you see most VR experiences either launching through Gear VR, launching through an app that you load up on your iPhone or iOS or Android device, or if it's using an Oculus Rift or an HTC or a Sony PlayStation, it launches as an installation, because that's really the only way you can bring people to an experience. So at the end of the day, we haven't yet even reached a level where we have competent 360 video. Right, and that's, you see YouTube launch. I'm going to get to answer the question in a second, but you see YouTube launching 360, and then they just launched 3D 360.
Right.
You have Facebook launching 360-degree videos. We are working on a large 360 project with Facebook, but 360 video is the gateway drug to VR. So you need to introduce people through certain formats to the next format. VR and the possibility of true virtual spaces where I actually have agency to walk around in a space, to take participation in that space at a fundamental level, that's just at the start with interactivity. And I think what's exciting for us is that merges where we began this journey of making stories that have engagement or audience participation at its core, and being able to enfranchise that through this new format.
You know, it's interesting because I have, I'm old enough to have kids that are, young and into this. And, their expectation on any content piece is that there's something to do.
Right.
So actually I have a hard time convincing my son that Star Wars is a great experience, for example, not to dump on anything, but because he just expects that if once the swords come out, he's going to grab his own and get involved. It's not some passive experience. Yep. And do you think this media might lend itself to that kind of, to a generation that's growing up on gaming and interactivity? Yeah,
definitely. And I think that the opportunities with interactivity are very, very exciting, and will continue to get more exciting. And just so everyone understands, like, there's the limitations of virtual reality we've been through this a couple of times in virtual reality, right? Everything from like the Virtual Boy in the 90s with Nintendo. But the problem was the screens weren't high enough resolution. So when you put lenses to magnify the screens, you ended up having a pretty degraded, pixelized, or what we call screen door effect. What Samsung was able to do, advertently or inadvertently, is produce very, very high grade screens, very, very high resolution at a low price point, which is ultimately why Palmer Luckey chose those screens in the first headset.
Right.
And then why that's being able to scale appropriately, why you produce a supply chain for the Oculus Rift, why Oculus Rift uses their technology with your Gear VR, that it's a symbiosis. Those screens are really, really important. Then you have the data delivery. Can the file size match the content? So can we load something on that isn't just a desktop computer sitting on your face? Now we can do that with phones, right? Everything's miniaturized. This moment is there, but at the same time, we don't have all of the power that we need in the computing devices, even desktop computers running Oculus Rifts and HTC, to go fully into the levels of interactivity that are possible. So we're going to see an evolution happening in 3, 6, 12 months, and I would just say it's scary how fast that evolution is happening.
Right.
Moore's law dictates that things move faster and faster in shorter and shorter time periods, but this is accelerated at a huge level in VR. We'll literally be working on something today that we can't even use a technique we used 3 months ago because the technology or the platforms or the hardware or the chip manufacturers are moving so quickly that we're able to do that next level very, very much in more of an expedited fashion than we ever have been. And interactivity and the seamless nature of that interactivity, because right now interactivity is pretty overt, right? Like you're either loading at a hot spot or you're giving a very obvious cue to a user, and part of that is because we don't have that audience behavior yet, so that isn't intuitive, and part of it is because it's a bit clumsy to make that stuff right now. It's not a seamless, easy, structured experience as a creator. So as both the audience experience levels up, 360 video, their first instances of VR, they start to expect interactivity like your kids do with an iPad, right? Like the minute the swipe on the iPad happened, every kid walked up to TV and was disappointed they couldn't swipe their TV, right? So audience behavior has to evolve to understand that that's a function of the content, and then the technology has to evolve so that we can build that at a fast enough, most conducive level to ultimately make that audience experience satisfying. And that's where we continue to push the limits on both accounts.
So maybe we'll back up because you've been very involved in the bleeding edge, and I imagine the audience will be interested in, where are we? How hard is this going to be? What's my nerd factor if I get in? Interestingly, there are a lot of Canadian producers who have gotten in. Yep. There's we're aware of through, again, being involved in content curation that there are a number of Canadian companies in this, and you're certainly right there with them. And is there a Canadianness to this, or are we at a point now where more people are getting attracted to it, or what do you think?
I think the last year has just exploded in terms of interest. So like there's millions and millions and millions of people interested. Like the Oculus Developers Conference this year in September compared to last year is just like day and night different, right? So that gold rush is happening, and everyone's moving out west to find their gold mine. But at the same time, what's unique about Canada is that we've had a very, very sophisticated digital industry for quite a long time, both because of public and private incentives, really, really good training, and high penetration broadband at a very, very large level because of how big of a country we are. So we've been able to develop the talent base, and as that talent base has become more sophisticated, we've been able to see more of that talent base, see the opportunity in VR and transition, and as a result, you see better and better content being made from Canada, which is exciting and awesome and something we should be really proud of.
Which is very exciting for us, obviously having our Canadian office and being able to see that come to light, that's
Definitely.
for sure. I also see different strategies, so maybe we can talk about that a little bit, because you have produced content in different ways. Sometimes it's been let's say a supplement to a feature, as you did with Sleepy Hollow and I think Insidious, right? Insidious 3, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
In other cases, you have taken that into, fully produced, a very different presentation of documentary material, such as Ebola. So what do you think are some of the potential business models, or maybe that's the wrong term, but the way in which content, could be produced, or different ideas for how this becomes a business?
So I think that it is an interesting time, and I certainly don't have all the answers, and I'm the first to say, doing the best we can with the information we have. So, it's a great time because I think at the end of the day, we're figuring this stuff out, and it's exciting to be part of pioneering that. It's also terrifying to be part of pioneering that. And I used to say this a lot more maybe 6 or 12 months ago, and it's still true. One of the worst strategic things I can do with my business is be on the bleeding edge, because the real risk is no one cares and we bleed, which is a problem, especially if you die, which is very possible when you're on the bleeding edge. But
or if you get your head chopped off, like
there it is.
Okay.
But the flip side of that is that if you're not in at a certain point, which is early, then you can't be a pioneer, you can't be a leader, and you fundamentally become a follower of what other innovators are doing. That's not necessarily a problem, but at the end of the day, if that's part of your methodology is to be leading and innovating and figuring out and what that is, and you're excited by the technology, that we sort of jumped over that shark before it bit us, because we were just like, you know what, this is too exciting, and fortunately we were getting opportunities. So to your point, I mean, primarily the earliest stages of VR, are being pioneered, and this is always the case, by 3 industries: advertising, the military, and porn. That's just how it goes, right? Because advertisers want the buzz out of the new technology. They want the PR. That helps the marketing campaign. They prioritize dollars. We've been fortunate that we've been paid to make VR. We haven't bought those jobs. We might have not known what things cost and probably didn't price our things as accordingly to the first job, but by the second job we knew what we were doing and we priced it accordingly. We were compensated for it, and so we've been able to put a lot of resources because we had resources coming back to us. But as we look forward, I think that there's certainly going to be the continuation of using virtual reality just like every other medium for advertising and marketing, and companies will pay for that, and they'll see the ROI out of the engagement they get from the audience, and that will be worth a value transaction for them. As the consumer ecosystem opens up, and you've seen this on the Samsung devices, but you'll see it on other platforms, each hardware manufacturer is going to attempt to either launch their own or link with an app store or some mechanism of selling content for their device. Part of that is because it makes sense to control the ecosystem of content with the hardware, just like Apple has. They make a lot of money out of their iPhones, but they make a lot of money out of iTunes. And part of it is because, to a certain extent, each hardware manufacturer has very specific software needs, and so it makes sense for them to control the content ecosystem because people need to develop under a certain software framework to launch on each platform. So, for instance, if we launch a VR experience on Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, Sony PlayStation, and Gear VR, we ultimately have to make a version of it 4 times.
Right.
Maybe not the whole thing from scratch, because we have learned enough to build in a fundamental framework that allows us to expand, but you're probably talking about 20 to 30% finishing for each platform. And on a wholly different platform like Sony PlayStation, you're in your own development stack. So you might be able to use graphic assets, but the development and the code is completely different. So it's not an elegant process, and quite frankly, that mirrors other inelegant processes like iOS and Android, which are 2 different development languages and really fucking frustrating to develop on, because you're making stuff twice, right? And it's not a good use of time.
Well, you just develop for Android, and that would be,
that would be one way to do it.
Sure, absolutely.
But at the end of the day, right now, the monetization that everyone predicts is that there will be a pay-to-play model. So I want this piece of content, I transact and pay for it. And there will be some form of an SVOD model where you'll see, and we've seen this on the Gear VR, which is really exciting to see Hulu dip in and Netflix step in. Now, right now, it's primarily their 2D content in like a 3D viewing experience, but Hulu's been very open that they're pioneering 360 3D content as well. So as those SVOD services, whether it's existing SVOD services or new SVOD services, like a Little Star or like Jaunt is trying to be, ultimately you'll see those companies try and acquire content and then charge a subscription model or some form of subscription model on content. And then there will obviously be brand subsidized content and people giving it away for different price points. But the reality of it is, if we don't figure out a monetization model, then ultimately we won't be making content for very much longer, because it's all good to have great hardware, but if we don't have content that mirrors it, then we're going to end up being 3D TVs, and it will be a very slow burn if it burns at all.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've made a judgment, so maybe we want to talk about that, and then I'd like to actually show an example in a minute, so maybe we'll cue that up in a second, because the fun is obviously in the creative, right? But But 3D, there has been some criticism of that. Is this a gimmick? Is this like the latest gimmick? But you've jumped in with both feet and obviously judged that there's something sustainable here.
Yeah.
This is a media that can go places, and you've gone through the frustration of being on the bleeding edge and developing in the different worlds. So, what I guess is your view, or what could you share with our audience about your view of VR as a sustainable trend? Something to build towards.
So I think the first thing is that we've committed a huge amount to VR. At the same time, we still do other things, and I think that makes us better at doing VR because we have perspective and we have the ability to bring experiences.
Yeah, because I think your earlier point about this is still storytelling.
Yep.
And you can't lose sight of
Right.
that fact, right?
And not to discredit VR, but if Magic Leap comes out and blows all of our minds in a year, we'll be doing AR too, right? We'll do whatever we need to get in the hands of the audiences with the best stories in the best way. But at the same time, what makes me confident that VR has a life and a big potential is that it's a transcendent experience for people at its best. It's hard to explain, and if you've been in VR, you know, and if you've seen good VR, you really know. But the reality of it is that when people put on those goggles, whether they're 12 years old or 80, and they enjoy a piece of content or experience a piece of content where they're actually brought into the content in a fundamental way and they achieve presence, or as close to presence as possible, which is a term that really unites the ability to believe, your brain believes that it is in or experiencing content, they're in that world, then you get that it's not an either or. It's not like I'm not going to not watch Game of Thrones on Sunday night on HBO or play Candy Crush. It's that when I get into VR, that the potential of that world is so large and so exciting that there's got to be behavior there. And if there's behavior and need and want, then that's where storytelling lives and that's where content is paid for. And at the end of the day, it's worth taking that risk on it and worth taking that chance. And hopefully we're not dramatically wrong and lost our shirts.
No, for sure. Actually, what I admire about the material that you produce, you have, it's very highly polished. It's a combination of things that you've shot in live action with CG, and even some augmentation of that experience. And I think it's the orchestra clip, if I'm not mistaken, that we're going to see, right?
Yeah.
So maybe set that up, because it's not just about putting a camera in the middle of an auditorium and then letting it go, right? Like you thought about perspective, you thought about you thought about supplementing the visual experience. So maybe you can talk about that.
So this is a good example, not to beleaguer how things get made, but maybe there are producers or writers or directors in the room. So when we did the Sleepy Hollow experience, we had one of the best experiences with the studio. Like, I'm not a person who complains about clients. I think we're blessed and very, very fortunate when someone bets a large amount of money on us, and I think we have a lot of responsibility. And I think where people get annoyed at the people who ask them to do work and then give them some form of commentary on what they really want out of that work, it's a mistake to think like that. But we had a really great, and we always try to have a really great relationship with our clients. We really view them as partners. Robin Benty was our client at Fox. She had the vision with a guy named Hardy Tankersley to do this. And at the end of the day, they were also doing a Simpsons experience with the LA Philharmonic at the Hollywood Bowl. She gets talking to the head of innovation for the LA Philharmonic backstage. They talk about VR. The next day I get a call from the LA Philharmonic, hey, could you come in and talk to us? We don't have any money, but we're interested in this. Like, I'm just interested in culture and music. So I went in, she took me on a tour of the Walt Disney Concert Hall. She was like, do you think we could shoot something in here? I was like, yes, that would be amazing. To her credit, she went out and with our collaborative work, we were able to raise a significant amount of money from donors and a grant to enable virtual reality to capture the orchestra, the 130-person orchestra, Gustavo Dudamel, who's the world's highest paid conductor and most prolific conductor right now, and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which is pretty low-hanging fruit in the world of classical music, and really to take that to the next level so that we could create a visual experience that could be traveled around Los Angeles to both schools and underprivileged communities and give people the experience of going to the LA Philharmonic who might never get the opportunity to go to the orchestra. So it was a really amazing experience, both from a creation standpoint and also the goal of the project, which wasn't commercial. It was really to just enfranchise more people to enjoy classical music and to experience something that they might not have experienced or might have written off in their brain as stagnant or old, as something that's pretty exciting. And we tried to enhance that with storytelling by creating this universe around it and telling the story of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony through animation and sort of CG.
Fantastic. Well, then I'm going to be the talk show host here. Roll the clip.
Headphones?
I think it's the most dramatic beginning in the history of music because it's so direct. Beethoven opens to you the door to go inside of your essence, but to arrive there, you have to go individually.
At the LA Phil, we are so proud of this new virtual reality tour, not just because we're using brand new technology in an unprecedented way, but also because we're sharing our music with the community. We are inviting LA to experience classical music in a way it never has before.
Virtual reality is a 3D computer-generated environment that the user can enter and explore. So we're really taking an old art form and making it new for a modern audience.
We used a spherical camera that's essentially made up of 8 modified GoPros to capture the space, to give a sense of presence in and amongst the orchestra that would otherwise not be achievable in real life. And we took that footage and sewed it together to create a stereoscopic 360-degree image. All of this to say, you've never experienced Beethoven's Fifth like this before.
So what we're doing is we're taking this VR experience, we're loading it into a truck, and we're taking it to arts festivals, to museums, to outdoor events, trying to get it seen by people who might not otherwise get to experience one of our concerts. And it's called Van Beethoven.
The CG element brings this piece to the next level. Essentially, we're allowing the user to have a representation of what the music does in the mind's eye. I often love watching people go into VR for the first time, to watch them take off that headset afterwards and see that sense of wonder on their face is incredible.
Wow.
You can come see us at one of our Van Beethoven tour stops for free, or download our app and watch it on your couch anywhere around the world.
The LA Phil is always exploring new ideas and making them reality. That's what Van Beethoven is all about. Beethoven was a genius who took music into uncharted territory. We are thrilled to present a glimpse of his groundbreaking Fifth Symphony in a completely new way. You'll have an experience like you've never had before.
Well, fantastic. I think that, first of all, if you get a chance, we do, I think, have, again, some demos of the VR, and you need to see some of the material this man has produced. It's really amazing. So, but maybe you talk a little bit then, because you did decide, to sort of include that multimedia world, and maybe that was a decision in and of itself, right? That added to complexity, and yet it was an important part of the way you delivered that.
Yeah, well, I think it's called virtual reality for a reason, not recreating reality. And I think it's because it's a virtual version of it. And I think when we try and just match reality, we're unsuccessful at it ultimately because it's not there. And I mean, there's certainly a role to be played through going to aspirational places or, experiencing that hotel on Travelocity before you book it, whatever. Those things are going to exist, right? But that's not necessarily the artistic vision of what's possible in virtual reality. And I would implore everybody to read a couple of novels that are just good. Snow Crash being one of them. It's like kind of the primer. And then you get Ready Player One, Ernest Cline, which is going to be made into a massive movie with Steven Spielberg. But those are good visions of like what the potential of virtual reality is, and a lot of people will call the furthest version of it the Metaverse because it's really this next level universe where we can have and enjoy and experience things that would never be possible in reality. And so that's not always the answer for us. Like you're not going to animate the sky above an Ebola hospital in VR with Frontline, but we are going to augment that story to tell it as an author of a story. And we're going to find the right way to do that with the story that we're telling, not because it's gimmicks or because it's enhancement in terms of visual, but because it should help make that story more meaningful to the audience. And ultimately, Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, a lot of people have heard it, it's could be borderline cliche at a certain point, but Beethoven's magic was not only transcending the current audience for that music and making it much broader, but it was also that like he really wrote two stories, and we wanted to make that story prevalent. So we have multiple different animations that are representing spirits, and those spirits are in conflict, and those spirits ultimately have a resolution at the end of it and tell a narrative that's not necessarily overt. It's not voiced over by Christopher Walken, or it's not subtitled, but at the end of the day, you can watch it 5 or 6 times and enjoy that aspect of the story, or you can ultimately just enjoy the music and the experience of being in the Walt Disney Concert Hall. And I think at the end of the day, for us, it's really the opportunity to try things at this point in the development of virtual reality. We don't necessarily know yet, and we don't know what's even appropriate at the same time. So we're trying things, and we're trying to step in and hope that what we're doing works. And really the only solution to making content in that format is to be as iterative as possible. So we try and build a prototype from day one. Our goal is to build a version of the experience from start to finish in under a week at the beginning of the project, so we can experience it. Now, it might be gray boxes and puffs of smoke, but at the end of the day, it gives us an understanding of how 3D space is related, because most human beings, including creators of content, don't think automatically in 360 space. So we have to train our brains as creators and viewers, and we have to create tools and a tool set to do that.
And maybe we talk, just, and then we'll open this up for some questions, but about the tool set.
Yeah.
One of the things that Samsung announced as a project at CES was the availability of more affordable, I'll call it, commercial grade material. You talked about almost stitching together GoPros at this point to sort of create the imagery.
Yep.
I think, we're trying to improve the tool set and even bring that to consumers over time in terms of their ability to create content, which I think will be really, phenomenal. So the tools should become easier.
Yep.
But hold me to account on that. Like that's my Samsung view, and we're trying that. So I know that you're part of this, and
Yep.
you've had a chance to preview some of this and other tools. And
Yep.
how would you characterize that for us?
We've been very fortunate. So we were able to shoot with the Project Beyond camera. I think it's not going to end up being called that, but it's what's being called that
the
right
project.
now.
That's okay. We said that in Vegas, so I'm not in trouble.
Cool.
I think okay.
So Project Beyond is a circular camera with multiple different lenses, pointing in different directions, and basically takes a cross section and stitches. And the promise of is that you could basically shoot with a consumer or prosumer grade 360 3D camera, and then it stitches together through a computer program that comes with it, and then pops out in a way that you could actually edit it or publish it. And I think that like all media, especially cinematic media, you're going to end up having consumer level devices, prosumer level devices, and ultimately professional level or professional grade cameras, and those will be determined by resolution and data, but also the techniques in which to composite and make those things more meaningful. So I think we need all of those things right now, and right now there's really only one category, and that's the kludged ramming together of non-360 3D cameras into some sort of camera array, and then taking not suited software like an Autopano or an After Effects or a Nuke, and doing your own stitching, which then means hand stitching. So the long and the short of it is, today the toolset is inadequate. Today doesn't mean in 3 months it's not going to be better, but it needs professional grade quality labor to take work and just make it palatable, let alone good. And that's not a good use of anybody's time. We're not putting the value on the screen. We're putting a lot of value into the process to make the value. That's fine. That's the way it goes at the beginning, but we need to get that further faster as an industry, and also at a consumer level, so that it isn't isolated to a very, very small group of creators, so that we can have more content and more meaningful content.
Right. Well, that's good, and I think that's what we are recognizing, and that the more, you've lived through the very early stages of the bleeding edge, and I think you're right to caution it. We're not quite at mainstream yet, but we're working towards that. I expect it'll come very quickly. And again, what we're trying to do is get mass adoption of a very simple way to present this. And that alone will also evolve over time, right? In terms of the VR headset that we've built, that was featured, and the phone technology, and now that we know that there's interest, I think that will also be, that'll add to, the way that we think about the products that we're developing over time. And Samsung's volume worldwide will make this a very significant platform.
Absolutely.
Like, frankly, it's become sort of a global opportunity because of, Samsung's reach, alone. So in terms of saying that this is real, I think that's part of the message is this is becoming, very quickly, a mainstream idea. Recognizing that there is still a lot of skill involved in producing the content. So not to deceive, but those tools should get easier over time. And the one thing feeds on the other. The more content, the more adoption, I realize the more content, and then the production will come with it.
And I think it's important to say that, like, any new medium, it's my personal belief, and I think it's Samsung's personal belief from working, but whatever is good for VR is good for any of us. And that means that, like, keeping things too close to our chest, or having secrets, or making everyone sign an NDA to have a conversation with us, like, we're not that company. We're the company that will tell anybody how we make anything, because we know that just because you have the recipe doesn't make you a chef, and also it's going to change tomorrow. And we need to be talking. Everybody making VR needs to be discussing what we're doing and how we're doing it more often, because that's the only way we're all going to get better. And if we're all making the same strikes at it and the same mistakes in parallel, we're in a bad place. And that's not how we get further faster. And I think when you look at the birth of independent film and you look at the expansion of the internet, this was open systems and collaborative people, and Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese having beers and talking about what was going right and what was going wrong. And we need more of that in this industry to get better at it. And that's why you guys are working with Oculus, and Oculus is working with you, because it's not a competitive ecosystem yet. It's a system where we need everyone to win, otherwise nobody wins.
Absolutely, absolutely. There you go, absolutely. Okay, so maybe what's on your mind? So maybe we can bring up the house lights a little bit. I think there's a couple of mics. And so if you just say your name and the question, and maybe give us some perspective, and I think we'd be happy to answer questions. See a little audience cooperation.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much for this interesting expose. I've been delving into VR for I started 25 years ago with the old technologies, and then, like everybody else, I forgot about it and started again about a year ago. And one of the questions we have, because we don't have the budget that the Hollywood studios have, so we work with consumer stuff, consumer cameras. And one of the big problems we have is how to synchronize those cameras, because there is no easy way to do it. There's no easy way to synchronize GoPros, for example, if you want to do 3D or VR. So how do you do it? You just said that there's no problem, you're going to say everything. So
My laugh was not...
I think to be correct, we didn't say that exactly.
Yes. He said it. He said it.
I'm happy to tell you, no problem. I mean, like, very functionally, if you're putting GoPros in an array and you're doing stereo pairs, like, you can either shoot 360 or you can shoot 360 3D, but it's fake 3D, it's stereoscopic 3D, right? Like, I didn't even get into the fact that what will betray all of the camera manufacturers, including Samsung, at a professional level is the fact that shooting framed content for a frameless environment is not a sustainable way to make virtual reality, which means positional tracking. Real virtual reality allows positional tracking, which means that it's not just 360 orientation, it's position. I can move in a 3D space.
Right.
But if you keep a 2D frame, even if you're blending them together in parallax, faking 3D, I can't move forward or back into a flat frame, which means what we've had to do is either, if we want positional tracking, put a shot character or a shot selection of things into a 3D environment, creating positional ability, or the ultimate is shooting light field. And that problem is light field doesn't exist at a level that's consumer yet. Lytro's releasing cameras, everyone's releasing 8i, blah, 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 blah. We've worked with all of them. Nothing's ready for prime time. If you think shooting on cameras is not ready for prime time, you haven't even thought about light field and the data, right? So the bottom line is that, to come back to your question, the simplest way is you line up all the GoPros, you download the GoPro app, and you pray that they all turn on at the same time. There's no mystery to it.
1, 2, 1, 2. They usually don't.
Yeah, so it's a problem.
The more you have, the less chances you have
That
of them
is a
working
problem.
together. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not a problem that anyone's solved other than taking the GoPro. So we're represented, and we work with Verse, which is Chris Milk's company. We signed with them before they launched. Verse has a camera package. We've built it with Radiant Images in LA. There's lots of mystery to that camera package that I'm not at liberty to talk about because it's not my camera package. But at a certain point, you have to take apart the GoPros, and you have to wire them together, and you have to fix the heat sensor, and you have to fix the battery problems, and you have to fix the rolling shutter, and you have to basically rewire cameras. And that's what we had to do when we built our first camera. And if you're serious about it, you have to dig in. It's not a good use of time. It's not going to be a sustainable solution. You know, Felix and Paul have done whatever they've done, and they've gotten their money from Oculus, and they've kept their camera mystery, and it's working for them. Whatever, you know. John wants to talk about how their camera's light field. It's not. You know, everyone's trying to make their play, and they're doing it however they want to do it. The reality of it is pretty base level at this point. This is tinkering. This is DIY stuff. There's no magic to this. The problem with making a good consumer level camera, or any camera, is the fact that this is a physics issue, not an optics issue. The bottom line is taking stereo pairs and putting them in a ring is not actually, it's not just hey, my software doesn't work well enough. It's like, it's an algorithmic issue, which is why when you look at like a Jaunt camera or Beyond or the Nokia camera, they're basically doing computational 3D, which is very much like doing real-time post 3D processing of shots, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it just means that you alleviate some of the physics issue and make that even more of a math problem. And again, there's no easy way to do any of this stuff. It's just about sort of tinkering.
Awesome. I went to film
Thank you.
school and it became a math problem. That sounds exciting.
Thanks.
But I guess that's it, right?
That is.
Yeah. So stay in school. Everyone stay in school.
Hello. Hi, yes. First question. How do you know we're not in the metaverse already?
I don't, and I'm willing to go with it if we are.
But my actual question is, so we're talking a lot about the visuals, which is great, and I think that, and also going back to what you were saying about cueing, something that fascinates me about the potential of VR is how sound will be used to cue the audience members to look at something, and that again gets back to this problem of positioning. I wonder if you might go into a little bit about what the state of audio in VR is, what the challenges are, and what do you think the opportunities are?
I think we've gotten the furthest in terms of audio than other things we do in making films in VR or content in VR, because sound has been, there's been binaural audio for a long time. So the idea, I don't know if you noticed it on the camera, but we had microphones. We had 80 microphones in the orchestra VR setup and a board setup. So we 2 days before we shot, we hung binaural audio mics and traditional mics all over to create a 3D spectrum or 360 3D spectrum within the scene. And then you also do post audio to that. So if I could, the reason I smiled when you asked the question is just because it's not a short answer, and this is not a short answer. So the level is high, it can get higher, but binaural audio has been around, and as a result, tried and true techniques can be applied. And then you also have the ability to do 3D 360 sound design, especially when you're working in a game engine. So if we take our footage and we composite that into a 3D scene in a game engine like Unity or Unreal, then we actually can position sound within that environment very specifically based on geography. And that geography then tells the user what they're hearing based on the position of where their ear is, because the orientation tracking of the headset basically tells the game engine the sound should be triggered here. And the true nature of VR is that 360 sound is the most effective in terms of moving your attention. But the lower grade the platform, and especially when you get into something like a Google Cardboard, it means that you don't have orientation tracking on a device like that, and the 360 3D sound doesn't work as well or at all. So it's really platform specific and then capture and post-process specific.
I think at the back.
Hi. Could you talk more about how you made 360 storyboard, please?
Sure.
With a ball. No, I'm just.
Pretty much. So, traditional storyboards are a front-facing, framed experience, and you're basically sketching what you're going to see in the frame. It's not like you don't need to do that as well. You still need to do that because you're still planning out what a person is going to see in front of you. The problem is, what part of the frame, what part of the 360 does that refer to? So we need to do an additional step where it's basically a top-down topography of the scene we're creating that we lay out as if it was like a floor map, basically, right? And then what we do is we separate that floor map into pie slices, top-down, because it's a circular environment, right? And then that pie is represented underneath the actual traditional storyboard, representing the pie slice that that frame of the storyboard is referring to. So that ultimately when we're shooting, especially if we're doing, like, we don't actually shoot the majority of what we do with a 360 3D camera because it's just not, we're not there yet. It's not good enough. We can do it, but the resolution sucks. There's a long story of why that is, blah, 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 overlapping frames, losing information, yada, yada, nobody cares. The reality when you're doing high-level work at this point, we're doing it with stereo pairs of red cameras, and we're shooting in what we call vertical slices. So we shoot a scene 360, but we shoot it in slices, and then we composite that together. So that is especially relevant when you're doing 360 storyboards, where you've got, and this is not for documentary, like you're not going to do that because you're going to lose information. It means shooting a plate shot. This is mostly, when we're doing high-end stuff, we're not doing it like we did the orchestra because you don't normally have 130 people playing in 180 degrees of your frame. Normally at a professional level, you can control your frame. And as a result of controlling your frame, you should only shoot the parts of your frame you're controlling because fundamentally, like, we're not in the whole game of like, oh, we're gonna set up a scene like a play and like run behind a bush. Like, fuck that. We're doing this for real. So we got to light this thing, and we got crew, and we got craft service, and we're not like running behind a bush to make this thing easier for us. We're going to shoot it in slices, and then we're going to move our shit. That's the bottom line. And we're going to light it again, right? And then we're going to pause it together in a high-end software, and we're going to make it look awesome. So that storyboard is really effective when you can control your frame. When you can't control your frame, it's pretty much meaningless, and you're just getting what you're getting, and then you need to editorialize it.
Pies. Who knew? And I think I'll make this the last question. Thank you.
So my question is, in terms of Star Wars, how would this secret location work? Like, I know that you're explaining how the difficulty in terms of putting everything together, but something as complex as Star Wars, have your team ever worked with something like that in creating that sort of space?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I would actually say Star Wars is one of the easier ones because of how much they shot practically. Two ends of the spectrum are pretty easy to do. 360 degree or 360 3D capture of a 360 degree set, pretty straightforward. Complete CG, pretty straightforward. Where you get into a lot of problems working with a cinematic partner is where there's going to just be a huge amount or all post. Like where they're going to shoot primarily in a green screen, and then they're going to do all their post, and they're going to do their 3D conversion and all of that stuff. That makes it very hard to be a partner with them because their post is going to like bang right to the end, right till they deliver a print, right? And we are not going to have context in their environments and frames and access to their information. So we have to then create it in parallel, which is always a disaster because we never have as much money as they do. And then it ends up being this digression of like, well, it was pretty good for what we had, which nobody wants to be a part of. But the minute I can get on set in Tunisia and shoot the Millennium Falcon on a desert, like I'm there. I'm going to make that thing look killer, right? So the bottom line is just getting an opportunity to be in the right place at the right time and picking the kinds of opportunities that give us the best chance of success because we don't have ultimate control over the medium yet. I wish we did, and we're getting there, but we have to pick and choose our battles a little bit.
Well, Thank you. And James, first of all, thank you for
Pleasure.
spending time with us, and for the audience, on behalf of Samsung, thank you for your attention. I hope this was useful and helpful to you. It's an interesting world. We're trying to bring mass platforms to you. The tools are still bleeding edge, but getting better. But the storytelling possibilities, I think that's what's exciting everyone. So thank you for your attention today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay.
2 seconds. I'm just saying thank you to Ken and James again, and thank you for joining us, and have a great evening. We'll see you guys next time.